They were just two ordinary schoolgirls, until one morning they never came home. For 6 months, the town searched, but no one expected their father would be the one to find them. Like this. It was an ordinary Thursday morning in the small town of Elmridge. If there was such a thing as ordinary, in a place where the pace of life was as slow and predictable as the rhythm of a grandfather clock. Birds chirped from maple trees that lined quiet sidewalks. Sunlight filtered through curtains of dew-kissed windows. Children laughed as they made their way to school, some on bikes, others walking in pairs or threes. Among them were the Jenkins twins, Lena and Lacey, 9 years old. Identical, yet wholly distinct. Lena was quieter, a dreamer who loved sketching trees and writing stories. Lacey, bolder, talked endlessly, and always stood up to bullies on the playground. But when they walked side by side, it was as if they shared one soul. Their father, Daniel Jenkins, a local mechanic with hands always stained in oil and grease, made them breakfast that morning, peanut butter toast cut diagonally, just the way they liked it. Their mother, Mara, had left years ago, swallowed by addiction and absence. It was always Daniel and the girls. He kissed their foreheads, checked their lunchboxes twice, and watched them step out the door, wearing matching denim jackets and purple backpacks. Lena turned back with a smile. "See you after school, Daddy." Daniel smiled and raised a greasy hand. "Be good. Stick together." They never made it to school. By 4:15 p.m., Daniel was pacing the kitchen floor. The school secretary had called, confused. The girls never arrived that morning. His first thought was that maybe they'd stopped at the bakery down the block, or gotten caught up at the park, distracted by squirrels and sidewalk chalk. But an hour later, when the sun had started to dip and their shoes still sat by the door, untouched, he called the police. What followed were the most agonizing 48 hours of Daniel's life. Helicopters circled the skies. Bloodhounds sniffed through woods and alleyways. Neighbors opened their homes. Volunteers fanned across town. News vans parked outside his lawn like vultures. But there was no sign, no torn backpack, no lone sneaker, no frightened whisper. It was as if the girls had been swallowed by the very sidewalk they walked upon. The only clue: a frayed red ribbon found near a storm drain 2 blocks from their route to school. It matched one Lacey had worn in her ponytail that morning. The media latched on. Twin tragedy in Elmridge. Angels taken. Daniel became a father defined by sorrow, his face etched with sleepless nights and broken prayers. He refused to give up hope. Every day he printed new flyers. Every day he retraced their route. Every night he stood in the doorway of their empty room, listening for sounds that would never come. The town changed too. Parents clutched their children tighter. Schools added more patrol. A town that once left doors unlocked now installed cameras and double bolts. But 6 weeks in, the search waned. Tips dried up. The police used the word cold. And Daniel, who once believed that love could bring his girls home, started whispering into the void, "Where are you?" 6 months later, winter had turned to spring. The snow had melted, leaving behind brown grass and brittle earth. The case, long shelved, had become just another folder in a locked cabinet at the precinct. But Daniel hadn't moved on. On a rainy afternoon in May, he was driving down an industrial road near the outskirts of town, looking for a missing delivery van from the auto shop, when something caught his eye behind an abandoned warehouse. An old, rusted dumpster. Normally, he wouldn't stop. But something. A flash of fabric? A strange hunch? A father's sixth sense? He pulled over. Rain tapped on the dumpster's lid like fingers. Daniel approached, boots sloshing in the mud. The stench hit him first. Decay, garbage, old water. He gritted his teeth and opened the lid. What he saw froze his blood. Inside, wrapped in a dirt-stained blanket, were two small bodies, skeletal, curled into each other like they had in the womb. His knees gave out. His scream tore through the rain. The medical examiner later confirmed it. Dental records matched. It was Lena and Lacey. Malnourished, multiple fractures, faded bruises, no visible gunshots or knife wounds, and no signs of who had put them there or when. But there was something else. In Lacey's hand was a torn page from a children's book, The Giving Tree. On it, drawn in pencil, was a stick figure family. A girl with a red ribbon, a girl with a sketch pad, and a tall man with oil-stained hands. The message was clear. Even at the end, they were thinking of home. 6 months before the nightmare unraveled, life in the Harper household was normal. Or so it seemed. Maya and Malia, identical in face but wildly different in spirit, were inseparable as they skipped down the familiar road to school each day. That morning, like any other, they hugged their father goodbye with laughter echoing through the hallway. But by noon, their absence was a thunderbolt. The school never saw them arrive. A frantic search began. Sirens replaced birdsong in the neighborhood, and every second stretched into a lifetime. The police, overwhelmed and disorganized, theorized runaway. But Michael Harper knew his daughters, and he knew fear when he saw their empty beds that night. Security cameras along the route blinked with a gap. One blind spot where the girls simply vanished. The town held its breath. Candlelight vigils lit the corners, posters fluttered like ghosts in the wind, but the days turned cold and silent. Whispers of human trafficking crept into conversations, but no proof surfaced. Michael refused to give up. Every night he searched the streets, following leads that ended in dead ends, haunted by the sound of their laughter and the memory of that last embrace. It had been 4 months since the vanishing, and the pain no longer screamed. It pulsed like a second heartbeat, low and constant. Derek Langston, once the confident, composed father, now looked like a haunted version of himself. He'd stopped shaving, forgot to eat unless someone reminded him, and barely slept. But the fire in his eyes, the desperation, had never dimmed. He had grown obsessed with the details. The crossing guard's angle, the timeline of their last known movements, the faces of every parent parked outside the school that day. He had notes, walls covered in pictures, thread-linking connections that police had long dismissed. And then something changed. It started with a phone call. A static voice whispered over a burner phone, "Check the old Carter sawmill, 3rd floor, back wall." That was it. No name, no reason to believe. But Derek had learned not to ignore anything. Clinging to a thread of hope was better than falling into the abyss. The Carter sawmill was a rotting carcass of its industrial past. Abandoned, graffiti-scarred, dangerous. He didn't call the police. He went alone. The 3rd floor creaked like a living thing. Dust choked the air, rats scurried into shadows. But at the far end, hidden behind a pile of warped planks, was a wall, seemingly untouched. He tapped it, hollow. He ripped the boards off with bare hands, revealing a makeshift chamber, a small compartment built into the wall. Inside was a set of children's backpacks and a diary. He opened the diary, hands trembling. It wasn't either of the twins' handwriting. It was rough, messy, disturbed. It chronicled names, times, pickup points, mentions of "the blonde one cries more," "they'll break eventually," and then, "he's watching again." The implication was chilling. This wasn't just a predator. It was an operation. organized, watching, waiting. Derek turned the diary over to the detectives, who immediately launched a new task force. Media reports erupted. For the first time in months, the case felt alive again. But with the new spotlight came new enemies. Derek's phone was tapped. His home was broken into. A warning was burned into his lawn. Stop digging. He sent his wife, Clara, to her sister's house across state lines. If they know I'm close, they'll come for us, he said, kissing her forehead. Let me burn for them. You stay safe. Weeks passed, and the investigation twisted into darker realms. A former janitor at the twins' school was arrested. He admitted to being paid to distract cameras the morning they vanished. His involvement led to a name. A local contractor with no criminal record but plenty of hidden assets. Derek drove past the contractor's home, noting surveillance cameras and a tall fence. Something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to wait for the system anymore. One night, using the janitor's confession and the sawmill clue as leverage, Derek confronted a retired detective, one who had been silenced early in the investigation. The man drank too much and spoke in riddles, but one line stuck. They buried the truth with a badge. And the badge was bought. Derek followed that trail. It led to a man named Eli Horn, a former city councilman turned real estate developer. Horn had invested in troubled youth facilities across the state. One of them had burned down mysteriously 3 months after the twins disappeared. Derek hacked into the facility's archived floor plans. In one of the secure rooms, a child had scratched something into the wall before the fire. T+EL, Tamara and Emily Langston. That was the twins' handwriting. They had been there. It was proof they were alive, at least once. The scream Derek let out that night cracked through the bones of the silence that had filled his home for months. The trail pointed to something far worse than he imagined. A network, a system. Children taken, moved, re-educated, or sold. Money cleaned through fake real estate and funded by figures in power. And the most horrifying part, many of them knew. People Derek had once trusted. His neighbors, his colleagues, his friends. The betrayal was suffocating. But then, another break. A former staff member from one of the burned facilities reached out under a false name. They had worked in the compound that housed the twins. Said the girls were difficult. One had bitten a guard, the other screamed every night. But they weren't dead then. They were alive. But not anymore, he added in a trembling voice. They were removed, discarded. It was an order, not a decision. The word discarded hit Derek like a sledgehammer. He pressed the man for more, but all he got was an address, a remote site in the outskirts, now overgrown and abandoned. Derek went there alone. He didn't bring a flashlight, just a shovel. He dug for hours in the back lot, under moonlight, sweat, and tears, until he hit something solid. It wasn't a body. It was a suitcase. Inside, 2 small shoes, a bracelet with Emily's name, and a blood-stained ribbon. Derek collapsed. This wasn't closure. This was damnation. 2 nights later, he found them. Behind a dumpster outside an abandoned fast food joint, wrapped in trash bags, like waste. Identical, lifeless eyes stared upward. Eyes once full of laughter, dreams, and stories about growing up to be astronauts or dancers. 6 months of agony ended not with rescue, but with rot. The father who never gave up didn't get to hold his daughters. He got to bury them. And something inside him broke permanently. The autumn air had changed. The crispness that once symbolized back-to-school excitement now clung like a ghost to every corner of Millfield. Halloween decorations hung limp, untouched. Porches sat quiet, waiting for children who hadn't come home in over 6 months. And in the Carter household, time had distorted. Days bled into nights, and grief lingered like cigarette smoke, dense and inescapable. But this day, this one day, would fracture everything they thought they knew. It started with a single phone call. Detective Reese had nearly given up. The case had grown cold, evidence scarce, leads drying out like puddles under a relentless sun. But the hikers' discovery of the girls, barely alive, frail and discarded in a downtown dumpster, had reignited public interest. Pressure mounted. And then, just past 6:45 a.m., Reese's phone rang. An anonymous tip. A voice distorted by some cheap modulation app. Look into the security footage at the old Shady Pines warehouse. March 2nd, 11:48 a.m. You'll find your answers. Click. He didn't hesitate. Within the hour, he and a tech team had seized archived footage from the long-abandoned site. Once a textile mill, now a graffiti-covered skeleton just 4 miles from where the girls were found. He fast-forwarded to the time mentioned. The grainy feed revealed something shocking. A familiar SUV pulled into frame. The same black Suburban once thought stolen the day of the disappearance. Reese leaned closer. A tall figure stepped out. The camera's angle caught the face just enough. Enough to see the sharp jawline, the distinct walk. It was Dan Carter, the girl's own father. Olivia Carter was making toast when she heard the knock. It wasn't a knock, it was thunder, heavy, urgent. She opened the door to Reese, his face pale, grim. "You need to come with me. Now." At the station, Olivia stared at the footage. Her mouth moved but formed no words. Her hands trembled. "This is wrong," she whispered. "Dan would never. He wouldn't." But the footage didn't lie. The date matched the disappearance. The timestamp matched the timeline. And the man, her husband, was seen dragging 2 small figures wrapped in blankets into the warehouse. "We matched his phone GPS," Reese added. "He was there, and he never reported it." The room spun. Dan Carter sat in a holding cell later that evening. Silent, calm, almost too calm. When confronted, he simply said, "They weren't safe." "Not with her." Reese blinked. "Her who?" Dan looked up, face expressionless. "You'll figure it out." It took 2 more days before the second layer peeled back. Olivia's sister, Meredith, had been living with them for the past year, helping, supporting, comforting. But deeper digging revealed Meredith's past, a dismissed charge from 5 years ago involving a foster child under her care, suppressed, buried by legal strings Dan helped pull as a local attorney. It wasn't Dan who took the girls to hurt them. It was Dan who took them to hide them from Meredith. He'd discovered bruises, heard screams at night when Olivia was out. But with no proof and a wife too emotionally fragile to confront her own sister, he made a desperate choice. He tried reporting it. Once. The case was thrown out. He couldn't trust the system. So, he took the girls. He hid them in a remote room inside the Shady Pines warehouse, where he could sneak food, blankets, toys, where he thought they'd be safe until he found a way to expose Meredith. Then, tragedy struck. Dan had a stroke, hospitalized for weeks, and in his absence, no one knew where the girls were. Meredith, panicking, found them before Reese did, and dumped them, like garbage. When this came to light, the shock that rippled through Millfield was seismic. Dan was cleared of criminal charges, but left broken. The girls, recovering slowly, spoke little. They only cried when asked about the darkness, about the cold. But they remembered one thing. Daddy kept us warm. He brought us books. He said monsters were real, but they don't win if we keep reading. As the truth detonates like a bombshell, The community reels from the revelation. The girl's beloved teacher, trusted and admired, orchestrated the abduction out of a twisted sense of protection. The father, broken yet burning with purpose, ensures justice is served. The girls, scarred but safe, begin the long road to healing. Their home, once a space of sorrow, transforms into a sanctuary of resilience. Media frenzy dies down, but the family's bond emerges stronger. The town, once blind, opens its eyes. From unimaginable horror rises hope. A family piecing itself back together, forever changed.